High cost of living, more Canadians are relying on credit and they're carrying more debt.
Outrageous. It's hardly able to make ends meet with the price of food.
I can't buy certain fruits, certain vegetables because it is not in my budget.
There's something wrong with Canada. Canada was once seen as a prosperous, stable and welcoming country offering a high quality of life where people can build better futures through education and economic opportunities. Today, however, Canada is facing a host of challenges that shatters its image as a land of opportunity. We are at a point where the richest province in Canada is poorer than the poorest state in the United States. In housing markets like Toronto and Vancouver, the income required to qualify for a mortgage is 2 to 3 times the median household income. Home ownership, which was once a cornerstone of the Canadian dream, is now out of reach for even the top 10% of earners. 76% of Canadians who don't own a home believe that buying a home is not achievable. They cite overpriced markets and the inability to save for down payment as major barriers. In Toronto, minimum wage workers need to make double the minimum wage to afford rent on a one-bedroom apartment.
Well, I just found out my rent's gonna be increased from $2,100 a month to $2,400 a month for a one-bedroom condo in Toronto.
We were looking for an apartment and I was shocked to see people paying $2,300 for a 500 square feet one-bedroom apartment.
But the problems don't stop there. Canadians are now grappling not only with a housing crisis, but also a cost of living crisis, and now even an immigration crisis, as record high immigration levels exacerbate housing shortages and strain public services. This is a stark departure from the Canada we once knew, a country celebrated for its affordability, inclusivity, and quality of life. So what went wrong? Justin Trudeau was first elected in 2015 on a wave of optimism and positivity. His campaign was built on promises of hope, change, and inclusion.
Canadians from all across this great country sent a clear message tonight. It's time for a change in this country, my friends, a real change.
Trudeau's Liberal Party achieved a historic turnaround, winning 184 seats and securing a majority government. This was a dramatic leap from the 36 seats the party held before the election, making one of the most remarkable comebacks in Canadian political history. On his first day in office, Trudeau made headlines when he stepped into a Montreal metro station to take selfies with commuters, and the photos went viral. Canadians were optimistic about the future, and Trudeau's approval ratings reflected this optimism. He boasted the second highest approval rating of any new Prime Minister in Canadian history and delivered a number of promises. A plan to cut taxes for middle-income earners while increasing taxes on the wealthiest 1%, funding for affordable housing and tax breaks for developers, introducing the Canada Child Benefit, a tax-free monthly payment for families to help with the cost of raising children, and pledging to welcome 25,000 Syrian refugees by the end of 2015. These promises resonated with voters eager for change after nearly a decade of conservative rule under Stephen Harper. Money were key to Trudeau's image as a progressive leader. But that was 2015. To understand how his once sky-high approval ratings have plummeted and why Canada feels like a very different country today, we need to rewind and examine the broader historical context. Canada is a nation of immigrants, built on the promise of opportunity and prosperity for those who arrive seeking a better life. For decades, the Canadian dream represented the idea that anyone could thrive here, affording a home, raising a family, and achieving financial security. In the mid-1800s, the country's population was almost entirely concentrated along the east coast, clustered near the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. Beyond this area lay a vast untamed wilderness to the west and north, regions the government was eager to populate. To achieve this, immigration became a key nation-building tool. In the early 20th century, Canada launched an ambitious marketing campaign to attract settlers from around the world. Build Your Nest in Canada was a new slogan aimed to attract settlers, particularly farmers and laborers, to populate and develop the vast, sparsely inhabited prairies. The campaign presented Western Canada as a land of limitless opportunity, often referred to as a new El Dorado or the last best West. The government distributed pamphlets, posters, and advertisements in Europe and the United States, highlighting the availability of fertile farmland, low land prices, and a chance to build a prosperous future. The strategy worked. Both lots of hopeful migrants arrived in Canada, drawn by the promise of a better life. Upon arrival, they were met and screened by immigration officers before beginning their journey into the frontier. They played a crucial role in Canada's westward expansion by settling in vast, sparsely populated areas. These settlers established villages, which over time grew into thriving cities, attracting commerce and industry. This development not only strengthened Canada's grip on the Western Territories, but also laid the groundwork for its economic growth. By 1920, population centers had sprung up along much of Canada's southern border, driven by the influx of settlers. The population grew dramatically from just 3 million inhabitants to over 9 million in a few decades. However, immigration policies of the time were far from inclusive. While settlers were often selected based on their skills and potential contributions, they were also judged on race. Canada explicitly sought to maintain its identity as a white man's country, favoring immigrants from Europe while marginalizing or excluding others. After the Second World War, Canada's discriminatory immigration practices came under increasing scrutiny. In response, the country began building its modern immigration system, aiming for a more equitable and inclusive approach. A key innovation was the introduction of a points-based system, where prospective immigrants were evaluated on criteria such as their age, education, training, and language skills. This merit-based system shifted the focus from race and ethnicity to the potential contributions immigrants could make to Canadian society. These changes to immigration policy were entrenched in the Immigration Act of 1976, according to which the objectives of Canadian immigration policy are, among others, the promotion of economic, social, demographic, and cultural goals, endorsement of family reunification, fulfillment of Canada's international obligations under the United Nations Convention and 1967 Protocol relating to refugees. The philosophy behind the system was straightforward: select immigrants based on their abilities and what they could offer to the country. One of the challenges to Canada's immigration system was the growing proportion of newcomers entering as family members rather than economic migrants. In 1975, family class immigrants accounted for 35% of all immigrants. Their share had grown up to 55% in 1983. On the other hand, the share of economic class immigrants had declined from 73% in 1971 to only 31% in 1983. Concerns arose that family class immigrants were perceived as less economically productive and more likely to rely on welfare benefits. This perception led the government to tighten entry requirements for family reunification programs. By 1995, the proportion of family class immigrants had dropped significantly to just 36% of total newcomers. Canada's immigration policies have been shaped in part by the significant power vested in the federal executive branch. This centralized authority allows the government to quickly adjust policies to address economic or political priorities efficiently. By the early 2000s, Canada's immigration system was celebrated globally as a model of success. Its merit-based, points-driven approach was seen as effective, fair, and forward-thinking. Even Donald Trump, known for his critical stance on immigration, publicly praised the Canadian system.
Nations around the world, like Canada, Australia, and many others, have a merit-based immigration system. It's a basic principle that those seeking to enter a country ought to be able to support themselves financially.
What truly set Canada apart, however, was its exceptionally high levels of public acceptance of immigration. While many countries faced growing anti-immigration sentiment, Canada maintained widespread support for its policies, with citizens embracing the idea of immigration as a cornerstone of national growth and identity. Until recently, immigration was not a divisive issue in Canada. In fact, in 2018, 2/3 of Canadians believed immigration was beneficial for the country, the highest level of support among all OECD nations. However, this sentiment didn't last. In recent years, public opinion on immigration has shifted dramatically. What was once widespread support has given way to growing concerns among the majority of Canadians. Under Trudeau's leadership, Canada experienced record population growth during his first 4 years, driven largely by immigration. However, population growth slowed down during the pandemic, which caused a series of problems, chief among them being a shortage of workers. Major sectors, from construction to healthcare, were struggling. Companies simply couldn't find people with the right skills. In an effort to solve the labor shortage problem, the government decided to boost immigration and welcomed a record number of immigrants to the country. The new plan aimed to bring in 500,000 people by year 2025.
Canada needs more people. Canadians understand the need to continue to grow our population if we're going to meet the needs of the labor force, if we're going to rebalance a worrying demographic trend, and if we're going to continue to reunite families and to do right by the world and make good on our commitments to support some of the world's most vulnerable.
Fraser, like many before him, viewed immigration as a solution to Canada's pressing issues such as the worker shortage and the demographic problem. Across the Western world, aging populations pose a significant challenge, but in Canada, the situation is particularly acute. In any given population, a portion of the workforce must be allocated to care for the elderly, as this demographic requires specialized support and services. This includes healthcare professionals such as doctors, nurses, and caregivers who address medical needs, as well as social workers and personal care aides who assist with daily activities. As the elderly population grows, the demand for these services increases, creating additional strain on the workforce. This not only requires more people in caregiving roles, but also puts pressure on the younger working population to sustain the resources needed for pensions, healthcare funding, and social programs. In 1971, there were 7 working-age people for every senior. By 2012, this ratio had dropped to just 4. Projections suggest that by 2036, there will be only 2 workers for every retiree. The number of Canadians over the age of 75 is expected to double in the next 2 decades, while fewer young people are entering the workforce. This demographic shift puts enormous pressure on the economy, healthcare system, and social support networks.
You know, immigration is not just good for our economy, it's essential. We can't get by with it. You need to walk down Main Street of any community in Canada, you're going to see help wanted signs in the window. This is the economic context that we're living through right now. This year's Immigration Levels Plan will help address some of these challenges that I've outlined by setting a new target from 431,000 this year to 465,000 next year, 485,000 in 2024, and 500,000 in the year 2025.
The government framed immigration as a global race for talent and was determined to come out on top. Their target was for economic migrants to comprise 60% of newcomers, an ambitious benchmark aimed at addressing critical labor shortages. When these ambitious plans were announced, Canada was already grappling with significant challenges. Immigration officers faced a backlog of 2 million residency applications, and the country was already struggling with a severe housing shortage. Despite these issues, Trudeau and his cabinet viewed immigration not as a problem, but as a solution. In 2023, Canada experienced its fastest population growth in nearly 70 years. One pro-immigration group called the Century Initiative wants to go even further and is advocating for Canada's population to reach 100 million by the year 2100. This polarizing proposal is driven by the belief that a larger population is crucial for Canada to enhance its global economic influence, foster innovation, and maintain the viability of its social programs amidst an aging population and declining workforce. Public sentiment on immigration, however, began to shift rapidly. In 2022, only 27% of Canadians believed the country was admitting too many immigrants. By 2023, that figure had climbed to 51%, and in 2024, it surged even further to 58%. The growing discontent culminated in protests during July 2024, an unusual and striking occurrence in a country historically known for its welcoming attitude towards immigrants. The government often touts impressive statistics showing the country's economic growth. While these figures are technically accurate, the growth is largely driven by population growth. Per capita growth is declining, as are individual living standards. There is a noticeable disconnect between the rapid pace of population growth and the country's ability to provide sufficient housing and essential services like healthcare and education. This gap is becoming increasingly evident across all levels of society, but it is perhaps most sharply felt in the housing sector, where the demand far outpaces the available supply. People who are most vulnerable to the effects of the housing crisis are often young people who have little to spare, like students. We hear about crazy stories, like 25 students living in one basement in Brampton. The number of temporary residents, encompassing both temporary workers and international students, has increased significantly. In 2022, this group totaled 1.4 million, but by 2025, their numbers had doubled to an astonishing 2.8 million. Most people had turned against Canada's immigration policies. They were upset and frustrated about the rising cost of living. Immigrants, on the other hand, felt they were being unfairly blamed for the country's problems. Trudeau added fuel to the fire when he said that housing isn't a primary federal responsibility. By September 2024, Trudeau's approval rating had fallen to just 33%, with only 26% of Canadians supporting him as Prime Minister.
Calls are growing ever louder for Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to quit.
This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
Amid declining poll numbers, internal party dissent, and the resignation of key cabinet members, most notably Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, Trudeau announced his resignation as leader of the Liberal Party in January 2025. When Trudeau took office, Canada was already dealing with a 3-decade-long lack of investment in affordable housing. Building challenges and supply chain issues only made matters worse. The rising cost of housing and general living expenses have become clear indicators of declining living standards. In 2019, 19% of Canadians felt that the country was extremely unequal. By 2024, this number had risen to 38%. Similarly, the percentage of people who believed the cost of living had worsened grew from 66% in 2019 to 84% in 2024. Canada's next elections will be held in October 2025 at the latest. Both the Liberals and Conservatives know that the housing crisis and cost of living crisis are the main issues that will convince Canadians to vote one way or another. The Liberals will likely lose the upcoming elections, and the Conservative Party is well placed to win. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, a harsh critic of Justin Trudeau, unveiled his plan to solve the housing crisis. His plan emphasizes a results-driven approach by tying federal funding for municipalities to the number of homes built. Cities would need to increase home construction by 15% annually to retain their federal grants, with financial bonuses for exceeding targets and penalties for falling short. The plan also includes eliminating the goods and services tax on the construction of affordable rental apartments to make such projects more financially viable. To further address bottlenecks, he proposed penalties for municipalities that block housing developments due to excessive local opposition. This approach aims to prevent small groups of residents from delaying or halting much-needed housing projects. Additionally, he called for the accelerated approval of financing by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, a federal agency responsible for housing project funding. He suggested tying CMHC staff bonuses to performance, ensuring timely project approvals within a 60-day target. To make better use of public resources, his plan proposes selling 15% of federally owned lands for affordable housing projects and requiring high-density residential developments near transit stations. This measure aims to create more homes in prime locations where people can easily access transportation, reducing commuting costs and improving urban living. The plan contrasts with the Liberal government's approach by emphasizing strict accountability and removing bureaucratic delays to address Canada's housing crisis swiftly. But even if the Conservatives fulfill all their promises, it will likely be years before Canadians can afford homes again. In the meantime, many people will continue to struggle with high housing costs and limited options, making home ownership and rent affordability feel out of reach for many.